What's up, Taiwan? I'm Eric Gao. Thanks for joining us for the news today. President Lai Ching-te is giving the Coast Guard special encouragement ahead of the Dragon Boat Festival with a visit to frontline personnel. While this kind of visit before a holiday is not unusual, the situation around Taiwan is far from normal, with China apparently practicing for a blockade. John Van Trieste reports.
President Lai Ching-te greets Coast Guard personnel defending Taiwan's north coast. The country may be preparing for the annual Dragon Boat Festival this weekend, but many of the people here will be on duty, helping any ships in distress and scanning the seas for intruders. President Lai is thanking these mariners for their dedication to the country and suggesting ways to make their work easier.
我们知道现有的雷达、监视器等科技工具必然有它的死角，特别是红外线热显像系统的建设工作，也要导入人工智慧。
It's a typical presidential visit at a decidedly untypical time. Because China is stepping up pressure all around Taiwan to push its claims of sovereignty. For 2 days in a row, it sent vessels into restricted waters around the outlying Jinmen Islands, Taiwan's closest outpost to the Chinese coast. This kind of incursion has become a new normal, with Jinmen's waters seeing around 4 Chinese intrusions a month, testing Taiwan's resolve. And Jinmen is just one small corner of the waters where China is flexing its muscles. It spent the past month sending out unusual fleets through the wider region. Both of China's aircraft carriers have been spotted near Taiwan in recent days, as Chinese warplanes and ships probe Taiwan's defenses. On Tuesday alone, there were 31 Chinese warplanes and 10 ships detected near Taiwan. Some security analysts see this as possible practice for an encirclement and blockade.
This is a signal that China may be preparing action short of an invasion against Taiwan in the next few years. This contingency and others can only be addressed and averted if our allies in both regions and the United States work closely together.
And then there are the Chinese citizens who've landed undetected on Taiwan's shores using dinghies. In one recent case, planting a Chinese flag on the beach. There have been 27 intrusions of this kind in the past 2 years that officials know about, and they suspect state backing.
这种分布很难用政治、经济、社会的条件，他们所有的配备都相当的模组化，所以我也曾经说过，我们不排除说是有系统性的操作，但是这一切。 都是我们在两岸灰色袭扰事件当中所需要做的防范措施。
Amid all of this, the Coast Guard is especially sensitive. The discovery that one branch commander spied for China has Lai calling on personnel to be more alert. But with the expectation of more drills and maneuvers and attempts to infiltrate high places, what's clear is that even if the upcoming holiday turns out uneventful, the Coast Guard can expect to stay busy as China tries to assert dominance at sea. Leon Lien and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
China says there are no strings attached to its development aid for Pacific Island nations. China is hosting foreign ministers from 11 Pacific countries for a meeting in Xiamen. Beijing also says they have agreed to uphold its One China principle. In recent years, China has increased its efforts to influence Pacific Island nations, offering them aid in return for ending diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Taiwan's foreign ministry says none of its current diplomatic allies are attending this meeting. The Trump administration is working to aggressively revoke visas of Chinese students in the U.S. That's according to U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. In a post on X, Rubio said the measure would include students with ties to the Chinese Communist Party and those studying in critical fields. The State Department is also revising criteria to enhance scrutiny for all future applications from China, including Hong Kong. International students are one of the largest sources of revenue for American universities, with those from China making up around a quarter of all foreign students in the U.S. Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs are on hold after a federal court blocked the U.S. president's sweeping global trade measures from going into effect. The U.S. Court of International Trade in New York ruled that the president overstepped his authority on the tariffs. It says he cannot use emergency powers to impose across-the-board duties on imports from nations that sell more to the U.S. than they buy. The ruling follows several lawsuits arguing that the president left U.S. trade policy subject to his whims and that he unleashed economic chaos. The Trump administration plans to appeal this decision. For more on exactly which tariffs have been affected, reporter Chris Gorn spoke with U.S. trade lawyer James Ransdell in Washington, D.C.
Okay, James, let's start with the basics. Now that this court order has been issued, which tariffs are blocked and which are still in effect?
That is a great question because there are many tariffs that are flying around nowadays. So this court order applies specifically to one batch of tariffs. They're commonly referred to as reciprocal tariffs. And then there's another sort of related group that are commonly referred to as the fentanyl tariffs, or what the court called the trafficking tariffs. So the first of these, the reciprocal ones, are familiar to Taiwan. They're the ones that are sort of applicable globally. They were the ones that are originally set at 32% for Taiwan and then dialed back to 10% for a pause period.
Right, these are the tariffs that were announced on so-called Liberation Day when Trump came out with the sign with the list of countries and their tariff amount, right?
Exactly. Right. So those are the ones that everyone around the world is interested in. The other ones are a more narrow subset. They affect specifically the People's Republic of China, Canada, and Mexico. And they were put in place actually very early in the Trump administration, even before quote unquote Liberation Day. But the reason they're affected as well is because both of those were implemented under the same statutory authority, which is what the CIT, the U.S. Court of International Trade, has looked at and said it doesn't allow you to do this.
Let's talk about Taiwan specifically. You mentioned that the 32% tariff on Taiwanese imports has been blocked. The 10% tariff that applied to every country in the world, including Taiwan, has been blocked. But what about the proposed semiconductor tariffs? These obviously would affect Taiwan's biggest industry. It sounds like Taiwan could still be facing those.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. That investigation is under Section 232. That remains pending. And when the investigation was started off, you had Trump administration officials projecting a very aggressive timeline for putting those into effect. So those may be coming sooner rather than later, and they are very much still in play.
The Trump administration says that they will appeal this ruling. Will the tariffs be in effect during that appeal process?
In practical terms, the court said, okay, you've exceeded your statutory authority. These tariffs are vacated. They're null and void. But they also have to recognize practical reality. And so they've provided the government with 10 calendar days. The government has already filed its appeal. That appeal is already docketed. Which suggests to those of us in the trade bar that they are working furiously right now to prepare their emergency motion to stay the effect of the Court of International Trade's order. So it may or may not see sort of practical implementation, but if it does, it will probably be a few days away.
So with so much still up in the air, it sounds like the kind of certainty that businesses have been hoping for in terms of planning around tariffs over the long term isn't coming in the near future.
Unfortunately, that's pretty much where things stand.
That was U.S. trade lawyer James Ransdell. As Israel ramps up its offensive in Gaza, displaced Palestinians are desperate for food. But aid trickling into the enclave is hard to come by, and distribution sites are turning deadly. Tiffany Wong reports.
Scrambling for food, hungry Palestinians swarm a United Nations warehouse in Gaza. The aid site was not open, but crowds of people broke into the building looking for food. A hospital said 4 people died and others were injured in the chaos. At least 1 person was killed and nearly 50 were injured by gunfire at another site in southern Gaza, controlled by the controversial U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Fund. These incidents raise concerns about getting aid safely to the 2.1 million Palestinians on the brink of hunger.
The model of aid distribution proposed by Israel does not align with core humanitarian principles. It will deprive large parts of Gaza, the highly vulnerable people, of desperately needed assistance.
After an 11-week aid blockade, Israel is only allowing the United Nations and the GHF to provide relief to the 2.1 million Palestinians in the enclave. But other aid groups say strategic GHF aid distribution sites in southern and central Gaza could be used to displace Palestinians further. Israel announced goals to push Palestinians out of northern Gaza and occupy 75% of the enclave within 2 months. Over 50,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's war against Gaza, with dozens more dying each day. At the United Nations, the Palestinian ambassador pleaded for an end to the violence.
Dozens of children are dying of starvation. The images of mothers embracing their motionless bodies, caressing their hair, talking to them, apologizing to them, is unbearable. How could anyone?
But despite mounting international criticism, Israel continues to dig in. In an address on the 600th day of the war, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised Israeli-controlled aid efforts as part of its fight against Hamas.
וביומיים האחרונים אנחנו מבצעים תפנית דרמטית לקראת הכרעה מוחלטת של החמאס. אנחנו לוקחים מהם את ההשתלטות על חלוקת המזון ברצועה. זו מכונת הכסף שלהם, זה מה שבונה את צבא הטרור שלהם, וזה מה שמחסל להם את היכולות השלטוניות, כי התחייבנו גם לחסל את היכולות השלטוניות וגם את היכולות הצבאיות, ואת שני הדברים אנחנו עושים ונשיג אותם.
He also claimed that Hamas's Gaza chief Mohammed Sinwar had been killed. With Israel determined to bring back the rest of its hostages and root out Hamas, it's the millions of displaced, hungry Palestinians that are caught in the middle. Klein Wong and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Pharmacists in Taiwan are raising concerns about a shortage of COVID-19 test kits as case numbers continue to rise.
几乎每天至少都20-30个人在打电话来询问。
Over the past few weeks, rising infections have caused a run on test kits and medication. Health officials warned that the outbreak could peak in June, with more than 200,000 new cases each week. To help ease the pressure, authorities are asking manufacturers to ramp up production, and they're reminding the public to continue to get vaccinated. There's some good news for Taiwan's workers, who will soon get a few more public holidays each year. The announcement on Wednesday was welcomed by some workers here in the capital, but as Cadence Quaranta reports, the choice of holidays has also stirred up some debate.
Taiwan can have a pretty intense work culture. People here work between 10 to 20% more than people in Europe and North America. So many will be happy to know about a new law that just passed that will give workers more days off. The bill adds 4 extra public holidays every year and extends Labor Day to public sector employees who previously didn't get that day off. Those holidays include the day before Lunar New Year's Eve, Confucius's birthday, Constitution Day, and Retrocession Day, which celebrates the end of Japanese rule in Taiwan and its transfer to ROC control. These aren't new holidays, but ones that Taiwanese workers didn't previously get off. And many that we talked to on the streets today were very happy about this.
我觉得适当的休息是非常重要的，因为我们平常大家都忙于工作，那如果休息可以让自己的生活品质更好。
增加一些新的假日，对员工来说是非常好的事情啊。我们可以多一点时间陪伴家人啊，然后有一些时间可以出去消费啊、旅游。
But online, Constitution Day and Retrocession Day have caused some controversy, with some people saying they're a celebration of Taiwan's authoritarian era under controversial former leader Chiang Kai-shek. They say there are other holidays that could have been chosen. Regardless of which days they fall on, these extra holidays are set to give Taiwanese workers more time off, marking a notable shift in Taiwan's approach to work-life balance. Fu Hua Heng, Heng Xu, and Cadence Quaranta for TaiwanPlus.
And thank you for tuning in to What's Up Taiwan. Follow us on social media to get updates from us directly in your feed. Finally, check out this French cliff jumper diving from a 22-meter high waterfall. He's aiming to break the world record with a 60-meter jump. I'm Eric Gao. Take care. We'll see you next time.